There's at least 3 good reasons I shouldn't make this video today. One, J3PO and Johnny Morgan have already made fantastic videos on the OB-Xa, both from a playing standpoint and a history standpoint. Two, there's an old saying that if you don't have anything nice to say, you shouldn't say anything at all. And I do have some nice things to say about the OB-Xa, I also have some not nice things to say about it. And three, I have a 1- and 2-year-old at home, and I did not sleep enough last night. But here I am, I'm gonna make the video anyways. Let's go. Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music tech related. And today we're talking about the legendary Oberheim OB-Xa. And we're talking about it through the lens of, is it worth it? Is it still a good thing to own today from both a monetary standpoint and a collectability standpoint? But in order to get there, let's talk a little bit about the history of this synth and what makes it unique, why people love it. And I'm not going to go super in-depth here because, like I said at the beginning of the video, there's already a number of really great videos that cover the history in depth of Oberheim synthesizers and also showcase this instrument from a playing standpoint at a level that I am not capable of. But I'm going to give you a condensed short history and my personal take on this instrument and my experience with it after having played on a number of the golden era kind of synths from the early 80s, late 70s, the polysynths, the kind of synths that all other polysynths are judged by still even today. And I have to admit that when I got the OB-Xa, I found one online, I ordered it, it came in, and I was surprised. I plugged it in, I started listening to it, and I was like, is there something wrong with this instrument? Did not win me over right away. It took me a day or two, actually probably the whole weekend, I think, to really understand and figure out what people were raving about when they talk about the OB-Xa. I also think it's really interesting that Behringer has been in the process of cloning synths, and the kind of major polysynth that they have, I think it's the first one they're going to release besides the DeepMind that's a polysynth, kind of a mega one, is the OB-Xa, and it's a UB-Xa, but I was trying to understand, okay, so there is a huge fan base for the Oberheim synthesizer, vintage synthesizer kind of lineage, and it's much more associated with kind of rock, a whole, 70s, late 70s rock, less so like synth pop. It's much more of a rock instrument, and it was Sequential's main competitor. Interestingly enough, in today's modern era, Oberheim and Sequential have kind of partnered, and they released the OB-6 and the Prophet 6 around the same time a couple of years ago. And Tom Oberheim and Dave Smith have a kind of really awesome relationship. Not that they didn't back then, but it kind of came together in the kind of second renaissance of analog synths. But back then, Oberheim was kind of groundbreaking in the 70s as releasing the first, arguably one of the first, if not the first, polysynth in the mid 70s. You could argue that Yamaha with its GX1 will release the first polysynth, and there's some earlier kind of prototype type synths before the idea of synthesizer was really existed. When it was still intertwined with organs, there was divide down synthesizers and things like that. But polysynths in the way that we understand it today, analog polysynths, Tom Oberheim was responsible for creating arguably the first or one of the first. And so that was kind of his claim to fame. And the OB-Xa was the pinnacle. This is arguable, but it's probably up there in terms of his most famous synths that had the biggest impact on music history and still has the biggest kind of following, the OB-Xa and the OB-X, which came out roughly about a year apart. The OB-X was only in production for, I think, a single year in the late 70s, and then it went to the OB-Xa in the 1980. And this was Oberheim's kind of response to the Prophet 5, which was released in 78, and kind of became the original gold standard that everybody wanted to kind of match. And so the OB-Xa threw its hat in there with, and in that period of time, you had the Jupiter 8, you had the Memory Moog, you had the CS 80 from Yamaha. You had all these kind of like mega VCO poly-based analog synths, and this is one of those that is considered to be up there, and it's up there in price. If you look at what these go for in the vintage market, they go for, you know, anywhere from 8 to 12 grand is what people are asking today. I don't know what they're selling for exactly, but that's what people are asking for today. So when I got this instrument in, I was kind of perplexed, and the thing that got me is that it's tuning. It's not, and I read about this later, and I listened to some other videos of people playing it, and I realized, yeah, it's not an instrument that stays in tune incredibly well, and it's more so than I think any other instrument that I've played from this era that's kind of a mega polysynth. You know, people complain about the unreliability of the Memory Moog and kind of its tuning stability and whatnot. I think the OB-Xa is, from my experience with this single unit, is more of a pain in the ass than the Memory Moog. And apparently some people really, it functions, I found it functions, it's where the magic is in its low end, mid range, where you have patches that were a little bit of dissonance, where a little bit of detuning, richness adds to the sound. And that's where it really shines. I think in the upper registers, some people like that sound, but it's, to me, it's just too out of tune, even when you're messing with the tuning. And this might need to be calibrated, but from what I've read, no, this is just Oberheim synths, and they don't, the way they were designed, the way the auto-tune functions, it's different than some of the other auto-tunes from that era. It's more pleasant to use the auto-tune, but the way it tunes is it only tunes from, I think, and this is a paraphrase that might be wrong, correct me in the comments below, but I believe it just tunes the C, the high C, and then it scales down the rest of the tuning. And whereas a lot of the other instruments would kind of control the tuning from throughout the entire synth. That might be incorrect, but suffice to say the tuning mechanism in it is not as effective as some of the other tuning, auto-tune functions in synths from this era. Things that are interesting and nice about it, it is 8-voice. It does have splitting capabilities and layering capabilities. I think there was also 6 and maybe 4-voice versions of this, but it has 8 voices on a lot of them. It had 128 or 120 programs that you could save on there. Some of the earlier versions had less. This one is a 120 voice version. 120 patch version. And it has chord, hold, it's got polyphonic portamento and unison mode, and the unison mode is massive. And it's interesting, it shares a ton of circuitry with the Prophet 5. I think more than any other synth, it has the same Curtis ICs in its VCF, VCO, and is the VCF, and envelope section. The VCAs are different. But they sound very different to me, and it goes to show that it's not just everything. The VCO implementation is actually really important. You can have the same core VCO chip, and depending on how it's implemented, or the same filter chip, and depending on how it's implemented on different synthesizers, you get a lot of tonal variety. This sounds so different than a Prophet 5 to me. And also, it doesn't have a lot of the things, the feature sets that the Prophet 5 has in terms of being able to stack waveforms and choose different, what am I saying there? Well, it's missing some of the things, the ability to stack waveforms, and it has less modulation options. What is nice is it has a selectable 2-pole, 4-pole filter, which is uncommon, I think, in Curtis implementations of the VCF. And so I think that's a unique thing about the Oberheim kind of lineage, is it's really renowned for the 2-pole filters, and the earlier models, the SEM kind of units that the OB-X was an evolution of, but they continued to use 2-pole, and 4-pole implemented filters where you could select between the two. The other polysynth that's like that is the Jupiter 8. So I understand why people like it. There's no other synth that sounds quite as large to me and fat and does it in a kind of beautiful way. The Memory Moog's very large and fat, but it's very messy and very like overwhelming from a sonic harmonic standpoint. This is a very nice sound when you're on the low end, when you're stacking oscillators. It still leaves room for other instrumentation, and I think that's what's part of its magic is, and I get it. Also, really interesting is that you could pan the voices, so you can, and there's not a control for panning, you literally had to go into the voice cards and set up where it's going to be panned, so you can get left and right panning effects. Very early implementation of that. Very cool. I think that's really interesting for this to be present so early in synthesizer history. So it's got some interesting things about it. Other than that, it's got 2 envelopes. It's got a couple LFOs, although the controls for the LFOs are limited. You can kind of get a 2 LFO effect on patches by doing a split and then changing the LFO parameters, and then it has an LFO in the control section. Let's take a listen, and we'll conclude with thoughts about, is it worth it both musically and kind of financially today? So there you have it, the OB-Xa. This one is interesting in particular. The detune function actually, this is an odd thing that I've noticed about the synth. When you have a knob, say you switch patches and the knob's already turned this way, in order to get it back to middle, you kind of have to move it all the way to the left and the right so that it knows where true center is again. That's an odd thing that I haven't experienced in another synth. It's quirky. And non-detuned is actually about 3/4 here, which is not right. And I think one of the voice cards is slightly out of tune and it probably needs to be calibrated. But from what I've read online, that's just kind of the way it is. Even if you calibrate it, it can be odd in terms of how in tune it is, which to me, kind of a deal breaker. I don't love it. I'm gonna spend more time with it. We're gonna do some comparison videos with other poly synths from this era. I'm gonna have a tech go through it. But I have to say, I was somewhat disappointed when I took this out, and maybe there was too much hype in my head. I had the opposite experience with the Prophet 5. I was expecting, there was a ton of hype, and I was expecting it not to be able to live up to it, but the vintage Prophet 5 actually exceeded what I had thought it would. I thought people were overhyping it. It really is an amazing synth, and it just tonally works, and it just works really well. The OB-Xa, I can see hints of greatness, and I can see why people love it. It was used by, Prince. It was used by Rod Stewart. It was used by Rush, New Order, Prince, Queen. It was used by a lot of heavy-duty 70s and 80s kind of rock pop stars. So definitely, I'm just a single person's opinion. There's a market for it. People love it. There's a reason Behringer is doing this as one of its first clones, as opposed to many other ones. There is a giant population of people that swear by the Oberheim sound. Maybe it's just not for me as much. But from a is it worth it standpoint, somewhat rare. There's a clone coming out that tends actually to raise the prices, it seems, rather than lower the prices, because people always find differences between the new reissues, and awareness is generated anytime there's a VST or there's a clone. It seems to just create a whole new audience for the instrument if they like that kind of palette. So the prices on these will probably go up. They are a bear to maintain. Everybody that I've read online, I hear more negativity about maintaining these than I do the memory Moogs. The memory Moogs become they kind of, when they have issues, they're unusable. I think this is still usable when they have issues, but it's sonically, to me, very unpleasant from what I've read online. And there's a number of things that fail that are annoying, such as there's some dip switches to turn individual voices off. Those tend to fail. There's keybed issues that tend to happen. And just different things that there's parts in here that there's someone wrote online. It's the casebook study for how not to build a synthesizer. So it's definitely part of the American sound along with sequential. Probably the most famous name in American synthesizers besides sequential DSI. Really cool, but is it worth it? I definitely think it is unique in the place it stands from a mega polysynth sound, and I think if you like that sound, if you like the bands that used it, yes, this is the instrument that does it better than the other ones. But from just a pure beauty and kind of elegance, or even just interesting harmonic richness or modulation standpoint, I think there's a lot of other synths from this era that do it better. And we'll get into that, I think, in some comparison videos. And I might change my mind when I set them up next to each other or when a tech goes through it. But I was hesitant to make this video. Anytime I say something negative about kind of a golden era polysynth, I get kind of roasted, and I probably deserve it. But there it is. Those are my thoughts on it. Would love to hear your thoughts. Would love to continue the dialogue below. Please leave a comment. Please give me more information that I might have left out. Would love to hear your thoughts. If you'd like to talk more, also you can go to alamomusic.com, give us a call, send us an email. Love to see you there. Thank you for watching, and until next time.